Okay, welcome back. So this is the second video lecture on the chapter of infancy and toddlerhood. And in the previous one, we were discussing, or I was talking about some of the sensory capacities at this stage of life. We ended up talking about taste and what we know a little bit about taste preferences, and specifically how researchers assess the taste preferences of babies. Okay, so I want to move on and discuss or talk about the significance of breastfeeding. I suspect you've probably heard this before, that breast is best. However, while breast is best, I think when we put too much emphasis on that as in our culture, that can make it very difficult for women, for families that for whatever reason are not able to breastfeed. So by all means, if this is a possibility, this is a good choice. But if it doesn't work out for any number of reasons, please know that that formula is suitable as well. All right, so what makes breastfeeding the ideal is it's a perfect combination of proteins and fats and nutrients. It's also a really good thing for mom if she's successfully able to do it. For one thing, it gets her body back into sort of it acts as a natural birth control. By preventing ovulation, it uses up all the additional body fat that she may have accumulated during pregnancy, causes a uterus, causes a release of oxytocin. I mean, I will say in my personal experience, I didn't get to breastfeed with the first one. I did with the second one. And I'm glad I was able to do it. The research says that the early part is really the most important. This is because of this release of this substance right here called colostrum. And this is really the early stages because it's full of antibodies. Basically, the mother is giving her immune system to her offspring. It's liquid gold. So women who aren't even going to breastfeed long term are encouraged to either pump it and save it or at least breastfeed for this short period of time. 6 to 8 weeks up to 3 years. During nap time, various things. So here's some of the benefits. Lowers the risk of sudden infant death. It's easier for the baby to digest. It reduces the woman's chance of breast cancer. It reduces the baby's risk of ear infection. It reduces her risk of ovarian cancer and type 2 diabetes. I don't remember if that's in the baby, but the point is that it's really all around good. It can be painful. It can be kind of a drag. Historically, what's really interesting about breastfeeding is historically wealthy women, like in ancient times, a wealthy woman would hire another woman from the village, her wet nurse. This is a woman who had recently had a baby, so she still had her own breast milk. That's what a wet nurse is. So women of privilege historically wouldn't breastfeed their own children. They would have someone else do it. And if you think about all the calories that it takes for a woman to produce food for her baby, that also potentially could lead to her own malnutrition. Then we go through a period where baby formula was very expensive. So there's a period where in American history, poor women breastfed, but privileged women bought baby formula because they could afford to do so. And then in the last, 20, 30 years, we actually have begun to see a shift. And that's women of privilege who have the time to withdraw from the labor market to buy the expensive $100 worth of breast pumps and the pads, and they can work a job where they can check out for half an hour every 3 or 4 hours to pump. That actually, it's women of privilege today who are more likely to breastfeed. So it's an interesting sort of historical economic shift. It's also, it says cost effective, but then I was just talking about the expensive breast pumps, but it's cost effective in that you're not buying expensive bottles of baby formula, right? Some of my fondest experiences as a mother was when me and my baby girl would go places. I'd put a diaper in my backpack, my pocket, and we'd just go because I was her food source, and all we needed was a diaper. Okay, so some of the challenges takes time, right? You have to be near your baby at time to clock out at work to go breastfeed. Some women do not produce enough milk. Some women have inverted nipples. Some babies can't latch on. There's a whole host of reasons. a woman's health may not, she may have infections or some reason she can't. She may have to use some sort of medication. She may, that she doesn't want to transfer through the breast milk, and it can be kind of painful. It can be kind of painful to have a child chew on your nipple for an extended period of time for weeks and months on end. Okay, moving on. So around 6 months, then a baby is introduced to solid foods about the time they can sit up. The researchers suggest we introduce one solid food at a time, but there is no, and that is for the purpose of looking for this word. It's right there, right there, right there. Allergies, to make sure there's no allergies to the food. And there is no specific order that foods have to be introduced, but they do say one at a time and to give it a couple days before you introduce another one. And if a child refuses, to try again. So when they can sit up, one food at a time. Then there's a phenomenon called failure to thrive. So malnutrition. Failure to thrive is when a baby does not develop and gain weight as they should at the typical rate. And this can be or is because of some kind of malnutrition or some sort of inability to use the calories that they are consuming, the inability to metabolize them, or the lack of the calories in the first place. So a sort of a generic term for this is what we would call failure to thrive, when nutritional intake is insufficient to support normal growth or weight. This is a generic term because there may be a handful of different reasons. There may be biological, organic reasons that the body can't absorb the nutrients, that there's some metabolic condition, or it could be potentially an environmental reason, such as they're not being offered the proper amount of calories. There may be some neglect happening. The textbook has an interesting reference to, or an interesting example of how these two things go together. Specifically, say if a baby has reflux, and that causes pain, so that when they're fed, it causes them, and the parent sees that the child hurts when they're fed, so the parent doesn't feed them because the child appears to be hurting, and this could potentially lead to some malnutrition. Another example that's offered in the textbook is that a kid never seems to act hungry, right? So even when they're hungry, they don't express hunger, so a parent doesn't bother to feed them every 3 or 4 hours if they act hungry or not. The net effect is children become malnourished and they don't gain the weight that they need. Another concept in the textbook is a phenomenon called milk anemia, and this is when a child is fed milk for a variety of reasons, or milk when they shouldn't be fed milk, and this can suppress their appetite, and milk then interferes with their iron absorption. So they're basically given too much milk, and in a way that it interferes with their normal and a healthy appetite to eat other foods. Also discussed is two kinds of malnutrition that are more common in other parts of the world, and that is a simple, I can't say them, these two terms right here, starvation due to the lack of calories, and then the other one is a kind of malnourishment when a child, but specifically a child who's being breastfed, gets displaced by another child. So before they get to a significant developmental marker. So here's a list of some of the other common conditions associated with infancy. If you've been around infants or if you have your own child, you've seen these already. But just to sort of highlight them, they're introduced in your textbook. The bowel movements are significant indicators of health and well-being. They change the way their color and their consistency. A caregiver, which probably comes to recognize or to notice that this is a normal bowel, this is not. Sometimes we notice when they eat certain foods. Colic is a generic term for a kind of behavior that children have, some 1 in 5 will experience, and it basically is crying for no apparent reason. Typically happens in the evening. A child will be difficult to calm down. This can be very frustrating to parents. The parents can be sure that there's something wrong. Because it happens so sort of on cue, it's because it happens so consistently. There's also a phenomena where parents become anxious in the evening because they anticipate it, and then their anxiety may change how they interact with the baby, and this may make the baby cry. So it's sort of this vicious cycle. Difficult, very emotionally difficult and draining. Sometimes, when colic gets really bad, a parent, frustrated caregiver may shake the baby, and this is a very bad thing because babies' necks are very vulnerable. Their brains are still forming. This can cause neck and brain trauma, which can lead to long-term lifelong cognitive impairments. There's cases where it like literally snaps the neck, shakes the brain around. This is very, very bad. Never shake a baby. Never shake a baby. Teething, so around 6 months, their textbook says don't use benzocaine, right? Cold teething rings, but don't be putting any drugs on your finger or any painkillers on their gums. Spitting up is very common. Sometimes they may have reflux. My kid had reflux for a while, my first one, and I remember we had to feed him very, very small amounts of food because he just had this, yeah, and it was kind of frustrating, anytime, there's brand new parents, you spend a lot of time with poop and spit up. About 1 every 3 hours, a baby will pee. Urination, diaper rash is caused by irritation of all of those really powerful chemicals on their little bums. From their poopy diaper, their wet diaper. And then jaundice is, that's what the picture here is. Jaundice is a condition where typically it's when the liver is not fully developed. And as the red blood cells break down, this causes bilirubin, and the liver typically extracts the bilirubin from the blood, and the result is they turn kind of yellowish. They're a yellowish color. This is also what people look like if they're suffering from liver disease because the liver's not doing what it's supposed to. But when we're talking about an infant, it's probably just because their livers are fully developed, and it's not really uncommon at all. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I think I got one more slide in this topic, but we're at 12 minutes, so I'm going to stop here.